The glass made a soft clink as Hyon set it down on the metal bar counter. The alien customer grabbed it with 4 purple fingers and drank the burning liquid in one gulp, his strange face twisted into what might have been a smile before he tossed a few credits on the bar and walked away into the crowded station. Hyon picked up the dirty glass and started cleaning it with a worn cloth. He had done this same action thousands of times over the past 3 months. Clean the glass, dry it, put it back on the shelf, serve the next customer. The routine helped keep his mind busy, helped him forget the pain that's chest like a cold. Stone Nexus Station was the biggest trading post in this part of the galaxy. Ships from 100 different worlds docked here every day. Traders, smugglers, pirates, mercenaries, and honest merchants all mixed together in the station's wide corridors. The bar where Hyon worked sat right in the middle of the main trading floor where he could see everyone who came and went. To the aliens who visited his bar, Hyon looked like just another human trying to make a living in space. He was tall, but not unusually so, with black hair that was starting to show gray at the edges. His hands were calloused from years of hard work, and his face had the kind of lines that came from squinting in bright sunlight. He spoke quietly and moved carefully, never drawing attention to himself. Most of the aliens barely noticed he was there. That was exactly how Hyon wanted it. 20 years ago, Commander Park Han had been one of the most feared soldiers in Earth's military. He had led Special Forces teams against alien invaders during the Terran Wars, fighting battles that regular soldiers could not handle. His unit was called the Silent Storm because they struck without warning and left no enemies alive. Han had medals for bravery and scars from wounds that should have killed him, but the wars ended and Han was tired of killing. He wanted something different, something peaceful. He met Yuna at a military hospital where she worked as a medical officer. She was small and gentle, with kind eyes that saw the good in everyone, even broken soldiers like him. They fell in love and got married, and Hyon left the military to start a new life. They moved to Colony 7, a quiet farming world where humans were trying to build something beautiful. Hyon used his strong hands to build houses and fix machines, while Yuna helped sick people in the colony medical center. They had 2 children together, Day, who was curious about everything and asked a million questions every day, and Nari, who was quiet like her father, but loved to paint pictures of the flowers that grew in their garden. For 15 years Hyon was happy. He had almost forgotten about the wars and the killing. He would come home every evening to find Yuna cooking dinner while Day did his homework and Nari painted at the kitchen table. They would eat together and talk about their day, and Hyon would think that he was the luckiest man in the galaxy. Then 3 months ago, his world ended. Hyon came home from work to find their house destroyed. The front door hung off its hinges and furniture was scattered everywhere like a bomb had gone off inside. He called for his family, but got no answer. His heart started beating fast as he searched through the wreckage. He found Yuna in the kitchen. She was lying on the floor in a pool of blood with cuts from some kind of blade weapon. Her medical bag was open beside her, and bandages were scattered around, showing that she had tried to treat her own wounds before she died. Hyon knelt beside her and held her cold hand, and something inside him broke into a million pieces. Day and Nari were nowhere to be found. The neighbors told him that ships had landed during the day while most people were at work. They heard screaming and weapon fire, but by the time anyone came to help, the ships were gone. The local police said it was slavers, probably aliens, who stole children to sell at markets in other parts of the galaxy. They said it happened to human families all the time on the outer colonies, and there was nothing they could do. Hyon buried his wife in the colony cemetery under a tree where she used to sit and read. Then he sold everything he owned and used the money to hire investigators and bounty hunters to search for his children. He followed leads across dozens of worlds, spending his savings and borrowing money and selling his possessions. One by one, every trail went cold, every witness disappeared, every clue led nowhere. After 2 months, Hyon was broke and desperate and no closer to finding Day and Nari. That was when he remembered something an old army friend had told him: if you want to find criminals, go where criminals gather. And the biggest gathering place for criminals in this sector was Nexus Station, so Hyon came here and got a job tending bar. The work was simple, and it gave him the perfect place to watch and listen. Every thief, pirate, and slaver in the galaxy passed through Nexus Station eventually. They came to trade stolen goods, hire mercenaries, make deals, and spend their dirty money. Most of them drank too much and talked too loud about their crimes Hyon served their drinks and cleaned their glasses and listened to every word. They saw him as just another human worker, someone too weak and stupid to be a threat. They talked freely about their raids and their victims, never knowing that the quiet bartender was memorizing every detail. Tonight felt different, though. Hyon could sense something in the air, like the feeling before a thunderstorm. A group of aliens had taken over his biggest table, and they were celebrating something. The leader was a krill, a species known throughout the galaxy for their cruelty. He was covered in scars and missing one eye, and his remaining eye gleamed with evil intelligence. The krill were natural slavers. They saw other species as property to be bought and sold. They especially liked to steal children because young ones were easier to train and control. Human children were popular in their markets because humans were considered exotic and valuable. Hyon had been watching this particular group for 2 weeks. They called their leader Vex, and he commanded a small fleet of raider ships. They specialized in hitting remote colonies where the defenses were weak. They would land fast, grab what they wanted, and disappear before help could arrive. Tonight, Vex and his crew were drunk and loud. They kept buying expensive drinks and bragging about their latest successful raid. Hyon moved closer, pretending to clean tables so he could hear better. His heart started beating faster as he listened to their conversation. They were talking about attacking a human colony. They were laughing about how the humans had tried to fight back and how pathetic their resistance had been. They made jokes about the parents who died trying to protect their children, and then Vex said something that made Hyon's blood turn to ice. The scarred alien raised his glass high and grinned with sharp teeth showing. "Remember that house with the pretty female doctor?" he said. "She actually tried to fight us with a kitchen knife. It was so amusing to watch her fail. We had to put her down, but we got 2 perfect specimens from her nest, a boy and a girl, young and healthy. They will bring excellent prices at the slave market." Hyun's hands started shaking as he wiped down a table that was already clean. His vision went blurry for a moment, and he had to grab the edge of the table to keep from falling. The aliens were talking about his family, about Yuna, who had died trying to protect their children, about Day and Nari, who were somewhere in the galaxy being sold like animals. He had found them. He had finally found the monsters who destroyed his life. Vex noticed him standing there and laughed. "What is wrong? Human, you look sick. Maybe you should not listen to stories that are too exciting for you." The other aliens joined in the laughter, thinking they were so clever and powerful. Hyon straightened up and looked directly at the krill leader. His voice was quiet, but it carried clearly across the noisy bar despite the music and conversations happening around them. "Who took my kids?" he said. The laughter stopped. The silence in the bar stretched like a tight wire, ready to snap. Every alien in the room had stopped talking and was staring at the human bartender, who had dared to speak to the feared krill slaver. Vex blinked his one good eye in confusion, as if he could not believe what he had just heard. "What did you say, human?" Vex asked, his voice dripping with amusement. The question seemed so absurd to him that he started laughing again, but the sound was forced and nervous now. Something about the way the bartender stood perfectly still with his hands at his sides made even the drunk krill feel uneasy. Hyon took a step closer to the table. His movements were smooth and controlled, like a predator stalking prey, but the aliens were too drunk to notice the danger. "I asked you a question," he said, and his voice had changed completely. It was no longer the voice of a simple bartender. It was the voice of a soldier, a killer, a father with nothing left to lose. "Who took my kids?" The other customers in the bar began backing away from the table. They could sense that something terrible was about to happen. Some of them had been in enough fights to recognize the signs. A few quietly reached for weapons, while others moved toward the exits. Nobody wanted to be caught in the middle of whatever was coming. Vex tried to maintain his arrogant attitude, but sweat was beginning to form on his scarred forehead. "You're just a bartender," he said, but his voice cracked slightly. "What kids? What are you talking about? You serve drinks and clean glasses. You are nothing." Hyon reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. It was a photograph, worn and creased from being handled too many times. The picture showed a younger Hyon in military uniform, standing next to a beautiful woman with kind eyes. A young boy with curious eyes stood in front of them, while a little girl with paint on her fingers smiled at the camera. They were all standing in front of a small house with flowers growing in the garden. "My wife, Yuna," Hyon said, holding up the photograph so everyone could see it. My son Day age 8, my daughter Nari age 6. You killed my wife 3 months ago on Colony 7. You took my children. The blood drained from Vex's face as he stared. At the picture recognition dawned in his remaining eye and a slow, cruel smile spread across his features. Ah yes, he said, now I remember. The fighting female with the knife, she died well. If that makes you feel better, your spawn are probably sold. By now, the markets move fast, especially for healthy human children. That was all Hyan needed to hear. 20 years of buried rage exploded out of him like a volcano that had been dormant too long. His body moved with speed that shocked every alien. In the room, his hand shot across the table and grabbed Vex by the throat, lifting the heavy Krill slaver out of his chair like he weighed nothing. The other Krill reached for their weapons, but they were drunk and slow. Hyan spun around using Vex's body as a shield while his free hand grabbed a bottle from the table. He smashed it against the edge and drove the broken glass into the nearest Krill's neck. The alien dropped his weapon and fell backward, choking on his own blood. You made a mistake, Han said calmly as he tightened his grip on Vex's throat. You should have killed me too. The remaining Krill finally got their weapons out and started firing energy bolts at Hyan. But the human was no longer where he had been. He had dropped behind the overturned table, dragging the choking Vex with him. The energy bolts sizzled through the air where his head had been a second before. The other customers screamed and ran for the exits, trampling each other in their panic to escape. Tables and chairs crashed to the floor as aliens dove for cover. Some of the braver ones pulled out their own weapons, but nobody wanted to get involved in a fight with Krill slavers. Hyan rolled across the floor, still holding Vex, and came up behind the bar. The Krill leader was turning purple from lack of air, but Hyan was not done with him yet. He needed information, and he needed it fast. The sound of running footsteps told him that station security would arrive soon. Where are they? Hyan demanded, shaking Vex like a rag doll. Where did you sell my children? Vex tried to speak, but could only make choking sounds. Hyan loosened his grip slightly, allowing air to flow back into the alien's lungs. Grim Prime. Vex gasped. The slave markets on Grim Prime, but they might be sold already. The markets moved children quickly. Who bought them? Hyan asked, his voice deadly quiet. I do not know, Vex wheezed. We sell to brokers, they sell to buyers. It could be anyone. Mining companies, pleasure houses, fighting pits, please. I have told you everything. The sound of security forces charging through the bar's main entrance made Hyan look up. They were shouting orders and setting up a perimeter with their weapons drawn. He had maybe 30 seconds before they stormed his position. Hyan looked into Vex's eyes and saw truth mixed with terror. The alien really did not know where Day and Nari had ended up. But Grim Prime was a start. It was more than he had known 5 minutes ago. He grabbed Vex by the collar and dragged him toward the back of the bar where a maintenance hatch led into the station's service tunnels. The dying Krill on the floor reached weakly for his dropped weapon, but Hyan stepped on his hand, crushing the bones with a wet cracking sound. The security forces burst through the front entrance. Just as Hyan disappeared into the tunnel system with his prisoner, they found 3 dead Krill, a bar full of terrified customers, and no sign of the human bartender who had started the fight deep in the tunnels. Hyan found what he was looking for, a small maintenance room filled with pipes and electrical conduits. He hung Vex upside down from one of the pipes and began asking questions. The techniques came back to him easily after 20 years military intelligence training never really left a person's mind. Every alien species had different pressure points, different fears, different ways to break them. The Krill were tough, but they were not used to being on the receiving end of torture. They were the ones who usually caused pain, not the ones who suffered it. Vex tried to stay silent at first, but humans were more creative with interrogation than he had expected. Within an hour, he was begging to tell Hyan everything he knew about the slave trade, the locations of their bases, the names of their contacts, the routes they used to transport stolen children. When Vex finally had nothing left to tell him, Hyan left the alien hanging in the dark tunnel and made his way to the station's docking bay. He had work to do and a long journey ahead of him. His children were somewhere on Grim Prime, the galaxy's largest slave market, and he was going to find them. But first he had a war to start. The Krill Slaver Guild had made the mistake of taking his family. Now they were going to learn what happened when you hurt the wrong human. The lesson was going to be written in blood and fire across half the galaxy. Word spread quickly through the criminal underground. A human had declared war on the Slavers one man against an entire organization. It seemed impossible, but then the bodies started turning up. Krill safe houses were attacked with military precision. Their ships exploded in dock. Their weapons shipments disappeared. The criminals started calling him the Silent Storm because he appeared suddenly and left only destruction behind. The escape through Nexus Station's tunnel system was easier than Hayan had expected. He had spent 3 months studying every maintenance shaft, every service corridor, every hidden passage in the massive trading post. Most workers only knew the main routes, but Hayan had memorized everything, including the emergency systems and power. Conduit's security forces searched the tunnels for hours, but they were looking for a panicked fugitive, not a trained soldier who knew exactly where he was going. Hayan moved through the darkness like a ghost, avoiding their search teams and electronic sensors. He had left false trails and misleading clues that would keep them busy for days in a forgotten storage room deep in the stations. Lower levels, Hayan had prepared for this moment. He had been planning for weeks, knowing that eventually he would have to abandon his cover. The room contained everything he needed: weapons, ammunition, medical supplies, false identification papers, and enough credits to buy passage on a dozen different ships. But first he had to finish what he started with. Vex the Krill slaver hung where Hayan had left him, slowly turning in the dim light of the maintenance tunnel. His breathing was shallow and his remaining eye was glazed with pain and fear. He had never imagined that a human could be so methodical, so patient, so completely without mercy. Tell me about your organization, Hayan said as he checked his equipment. Who gives the orders? Who decides which colonies to attack? Who runs the slave markets on Grim Prime? Vex tried to shake his head, but the movement sent waves of agony through his broken body. The council, he whispered. 5 Krill warlords who control different parts of the slave trade. They meet once a year to divide territories and set prices. They are the ones who ordered the raids on human colonies. Hayan pulled out a small recording device and held it close to Vex's mouth. Keep talking. I want names, locations, everything you know about how they operate. For the next 2 hours, Vex talked. He told Hayan about the Council's hidden fortress on the moon of Kalar, about their private armies and their network of corrupt officials. He described the slave processing centers where stolen children were sorted and prepared for sale. He revealed the secret routes they used to transport their victims and the buyers who paid the highest prices. The information was more valuable than gold. Hayan now had a complete map of the Krill slave trade, from the raiding parties that stole children to the final buyers who purchased them. The network was vast and well organized, but it had weaknesses that could be exploited. When Vex had nothing left to tell him, Hayan made a decision that surprised even himself. He did not kill the Krill slaver. Instead, he left him hanging in the tunnel with a recording device nearby. The device would broadcast Vex's confession to every news network in the galaxy in exactly 24 hours. Let the universe hear what you really are, Hayan said as he gathered his equipment. Let everyone know what the Krill do to innocent families. The journey to Grim Prime took 6 days on a smuggler's ship whose captain asked no questions as long as he was paid in advance. Hayan spent the time studying intelligence reports about the slave markets and planning his approach. He could not simply storm in with weapons blazing, not if he wanted to find his children alive. Grim Prime was a nightmare world where every form of suffering was bought and sold. The planet had no government, only the market council that regulated trade and collected taxes on every transaction. The cities were built around massive auction houses where thousands of beings were sold every day like livestock. Hayan arrived with false papers identifying him as a wealthy collector from the Outer Rim. He wore expensive clothes and carried a case full of credits. His story was that he was looking for rare specimens for his private collection. The slavers who controlled the markets welcomed him eagerly. The first auction house he visited made his stomach turn. Beings of every species stood in cages waiting to be sold. Children cried for their parents, while adults stared ahead with dead eyes that had given up hope. The auctioneers spoke in cheerful voices, as if they were selling furniture instead of living creatures. Hayan walked through the display areas, fighting to keep his expression neutral. Every time he saw a human child, his heart stopped for a moment, hoping it might be Day or Nari, but none of them were his children. He forced himself to look at the sales records, to study the transaction logs, to trace where the children from Colony 7 might have ended up. The breakthrough Came on his third day at the markets, he found a broker named Zilak who specialized in human children. The alien was small and nervous, with too many eyes and a voice like grinding metal. He kept detailed records of every transaction, and he remembered the shipment from Colony 7. Beautiful specimens, he said, rubbing his hands together greedily. The female was perfect for domestic service, and the male showed excellent potential for heavy labor. I sold them to different buyers, of course, separating families increases the value. Hyan felt his blood turn to ice, but he kept his voice steady. Which buyers, he asked. Where did they go? The female went to a collector named Kane, who operates on Hedon. Zilek said, checking his records. Very exclusive clientele. Pays top prices for exotic pets. The male was purchased by the Mining Guild for their operations in the Void Sector. Hyan memorized every detail of the sales records while maintaining his cover as an interested buyer. 2 different locations, hundreds of light years apart, both heavily defended and controlled by powerful organizations. It would take careful planning to reach his children, but as he prepared to leave Grim Prime, Hyan realized that his personal mission had grown into something larger. The confession he had recorded from Vex was already spreading across the galaxy. News networks were broadcasting the story of the human bartender who had declared war on the slave trade. Public outrage was building on dozens of worlds. Governments that had ignored the slave trade for decades suddenly faced angry citizens demanding action. Human colonies were organizing defense forces, while alien species who respected courage began offering support. The Krill Slaver Guild was in panic mode. Their hidden bases were being raided by bounty hunters and military forces. Their ships were attacked wherever they appeared. Their carefully built network was collapsing as former allies abandoned them to save themselves, but Hyan was not satisfied with destroying the Krill. He wanted to burn down the entire slave trade to make sure that no other parent would suffer what he had suffered. He began contacting other victims' families that had lost children to slavers' parents who thought their children were gone forever. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of families reached out to him offering information, money, weapons, whatever he needed. Some were humans, but others were aliens whose children had also been stolen. The slave trade was an equal opportunity destroyer of families. Together, they began building something that the galaxy had never seen before. A network of victims turned hunters who would track down every slaver, every buyer, every corrupt official who profited from stolen children. They called themselves the Silent Storm, after the nickname that criminals had given to Hyan. Within weeks, the Silent Storm had agents on dozens of worlds. They rescued enslaved children, attacked slave ships, and gathered evidence of the trade's corruption. They shared information freely and struck without warning, leaving their enemies confused and terrified. The galaxy was changing. Worlds that had tolerated slavery for centuries began passing new laws. Governments that had looked the other way suddenly found themselves under pressure to act. The slave trade was being driven into the shadows, but Hyan knew it was not enough. He still had 2 children to save and an entire criminal empire to destroy. The mining facility in the Void Sector was a fortress built into an asteroid field where convicted criminals and enslaved beings worked until they died. The Mining Guild controlled 17 systems in this region of space, and their private military was larger than most planetary defense forces. Nobody attacked their installations and lived to tell about it. Nobody except Hyan. He spent 2 weeks studying the facility from a hidden observation post on a nearby asteroid. The place was massive, with thousands of workers digging precious metals from the rock deep. Scanners showed him the layout of tunnels and living quarters, while intercepted communications revealed guard schedules and shift changes. Finding day among thousands of workers seemed impossible until Hyan hacked into the facility's computer system. The Mining Guild kept detailed records of every slave, including their species, age, and work assignments. A search for human males aged 8 brought up 12 results, but only one matched the physical description from the sales records. Prisoner designation H7749 was assigned to uranium mining in the deepest tunnels, where radiation levels made the work extremely dangerous. The life expectancy for workers in that section was less than 2 years. Hyan felt sick as he read the file, but he also felt hope. His son was alive. The rescue mission required perfect timing and overwhelming force. Hyan had learned from his years in special forces that complex plans usually failed. Simple, direct action worked better. He would go in fast, hit hard, and leave nothing alive that could follow him at exactly midnight station time, when most of the facility was asleep. Hyon launched his attack. He had modified his stolen ship with military grade weapons and shield generators. The first strike destroyed the facility's main power plant, plunging most of the complex into darkness. Emergency lighting flickered on as confused guards tried to figure out what was happening. Their communication systems were jammed, and their sensors showed nothing but static. They had no idea that death was already inside their walls. Hyon moved through the maintenance tunnels like a ghost from his nightmares. His military training had taught him to be silent, efficient, and absolutely ruthless when protecting the innocent. The guards who died never saw him coming. Those who lived wished they had died instead. The path to the uranium mines led through 3 security checkpoints, each one more heavily defended than the last, but the guards were used to keeping prisoners and not keeping attackers out. Their weapons were designed for crowd control, not military combat. They fell like wheat before a scythe. In the deepest tunnels, Hyon found his Sunday was thinner than in the family photographs, and his clothes were filthy rags. His hands were cut and bleeding from handling radioactive ore, and his eyes had the hollow look of someone who had seen too much suffering. But when he saw his father standing in the tunnel entrance, something bright and fierce flashed across his young face. "Dad," he whispered, "did you kill them all?" "Not yet," Hyon replied as he cut the chains that held his son. "But I will." The journey back to the surface was a running battle through collapsing tunnels and desperate guards. Hyon carried Day on his back while fighting their way past security teams and automated defense systems. The facility was coming apart around them as explosions shook the asteroid. They reached Hyon's ship just as reinforcements arrived from other mining guild installations, but the ship was already moving, blasting clear of the asteroid field before the enemy vessels could get weapons lock. The facility burned behind them like a funeral pyre for the guards who had tormented enslaved children. Father and son sat in the ship's small cabin as they jumped to hyperspace. Day stared at his hands, which were still shaking from months of fear and exhaustion, while Hyon checked him for injuries and radiation exposure. "Where is Nari?" Day asked quietly. "A place called Hedon." Hyon replied. "Your sister is alive, and I am going to bring her home." "What about Mom?" Hyon was quiet for a long moment. "She is gone, son. The slavers killed her when they took you, and Nari, but she fought to protect you both. She died like a warrior." Day nodded as tears rolled down his dirty cheeks. "I heard the guards talking about a human who was attacking slaver bases. They called him the Silent Storm." "I knew it was you," I told the other kids that my dad was coming to save us, not just you." Hyon said, "All of them. Every child stolen by slavers, every family destroyed by the trade. They are all going to pay for what they have done." The journey to Hedon took 4 days, during which father and son began to reconnect. Day told Hyon about the horrors he had witnessed in the mines, while Hyon shared stories about the growing rebellion against the slave trade. The Silent Storm network now had agents on over 100 worlds, and rescued children were being reunited with their families every day. But Hedon would be different. The pleasure planet was where the galaxy's wealthy elite came to indulge their darkest desires. It was protected by private armies and surrounded by defensive satellites. Nothing happened there without the approval of the syndicate bosses who controlled every aspect of life on the planet. Intelligence reports showed that Nari was being held by a collector named Kane, who specialized in exotic pets for his wealthy clients. The term exotic pets was code for enslaved beings who were bought for entertainment and decoration. Hyon felt his rage building as he read about Kane's collection. The approach to Hedon required subtlety rather than force. A direct attack would only get Nari killed before he could reach her. Instead, Hyon used his network of contacts to arrange a meeting with Kane. He posed as a wealthy collector interested in trading rare specimens. Kane's mansion was a monument to evil disguised as luxury. The rooms were filled with caged beings from dozens of species, some dressed as servants, others displayed like living artwork. Children sat in golden cages, while adults performed for the amusement of guests who paid enormous sums for the privilege. Hyon walked through the mansion with Day hidden on his ship, fighting every instinct that screamed at him to start killing. Everyone in this place deserved to die, but he had to find Nari first. He had to be smart, patient, careful The meeting with Kane took place in a private room overlooking the mansion's sculpture garden. The collector was a thin, elegant alien with pale skin and cold eyes. He spoke softly about his passion for collecting rare and beautiful things. As if enslaved beings were works of art, have something special to show you, Kane said, leading Hyon to a private viewing room. Behind the transparent wall was a small bedroom decorated in soft colors. A little girl sat at a desk painting pictures of flowers and birds. She looked older than in the family photographs, and her eyes held sadness that no child should carry, but she was alive. She was his daughter. She was Nari, isn't she? Perfect, Kane whispered. This one has such talent, such spirit. I have been training her personally. She will make someone very happy. Hyon stared through the wall at his daughter, feeling his heart break and rebuild itself at the same time. Nari looked up from her painting as if she sensed someone watching her. Their eyes met through the transparent barrier, and recognition flashed across her. Young-faced Daddy, she mouthed silently, tears streaming down her cheeks. How much? Hyon asked, his voice steady despite the volcano of rage building inside. She is not for sale, Kane replied, but I might consider a trade if you have something truly exceptional. Hyon smiled, and the expression made Kane's blood run cold. I do have something exceptional, he said. Something you have never seen before. What is that, Kane? Asked a father who will burn this entire planet to ash if you do not give me back my daughter. The killing started 30 seconds later. The mansion erupted into chaos as Hyon's carefully controlled rage finally exploded into action. Kane reached for the alarm button on his desk, but his hand never made it. Hyon moved with the speed of a striking snake, breaking the collector's neck. With a single twist before the alien could cry out security, systems throughout the building began screaming warnings as doors slammed shut and armed guards poured into the corridors. But Hyon had studied the mansion's layout for days, and he knew exactly where every guard would be, every camera would point, every exit would lead. The transparent wall that separated him from Nari shattered under the impact of a chair thrown with inhuman strength. Glass showered the floor as Hyon stepped through the opening and knelt beside his daughter, who had pressed herself against the far wall in terror. It's okay, sweetheart, he said softly, extending his hand toward her. It's Daddy, I came to take you home. Nari stared at him with wide eyes, still not quite believing what she was seeing. You look different, she whispered. Your face is scary now. Hyon caught his reflection in a broken piece of glass and understood what she meant. The gentle father who had tucked her into bed every night was gone, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. But when he smiled at her, his eyes softened with the same love. She remembered. I am still your daddy, he said, picking her up in his arms. I will always be your daddy. Now we have to go find your brother and get out of here. The fighting in the corridors was brief, and brutal guards trained to intimidate wealthy clients found themselves facing a man who had survived the bloodiest battles of the Terran Wars. Their energy weapons and body armor were useless against someone who moved like death itself and struck without hesitation or mercy. Hyon carried Nari through the mansion while bodies fell around them. She buried her face against his shoulder and refused to look at the carnage, but she did not cry. She had learned to be strong during her months in captivity, and she trusted her father to protect her. The other enslaved beings in the mansion stared in shock as their cages were opened by a human covered in blood. Some of them had been prisoners for years and could barely remember what freedom felt like. Others were too frightened to move, even when their chains were broken. You are free, Hyon told them as he worked. Run, hide, fight back, do whatever you must, but never let anyone put you in a cage again. Some of the freed prisoners followed him toward the exit, while others scattered in different directions, seeking their own paths to safety. The mansion that had been a monument to cruelty became a symbol of liberation as years of suffering were avenged, and a single night day was waiting at the ship with weapons ready and engines warming. He had grown up fast during his months in the uranium mines, and his eyes held the same hard light as his father's. When he saw Nari safe in Hyon's arms, tears of relief mixed with joy on his young face. Sister, he called out as they boarded the ship. Are you hurt? Did they, okay? Nari interrupted, hugging him tightly. They made me paint pictures for their guests, but they did not hurt me like they hurt others. I was lucky. As their ship lifted off from Hedon, Hyon looked back at the burning mansion and felt a moment of satisfaction, but the feeling was brief because he knew that Kane's death was just one small victory in a much larger war. The Slave trade had thousands of collectors and millions of victims scattered across the galaxy. News of the rescue spread quickly through the Silent Storm network. Within hours, every major news service in known space was broadcasting the story of the human father who had single-handedly destroyed one of Heden's most exclusive establishments. The footage of freed prisoners streaming out of the burning mansion became a symbol of hope for enslaved beings everywhere, but the story also had an unexpected effect on Earth itself. For 20 years, the human government had maintained a policy of non-interference in galactic affairs. They preferred trade and diplomacy to military action, and they had largely ignored the plight of human colonists who lived beyond their direct protection. The images of human children in slave markets changed everything. Public outrage swept across Earth as citizens learned the truth about what was happening to their people in the outer colonies. Protests filled the streets, while politicians who had ignored the problem suddenly found themselves facing angry voters demanding action. Admiral Chun, commander of Earth's Deep Space Fleet, received new orders that made her smile with grim satisfaction. After years of being told to avoid confrontation with alien powers, she was finally authorized to take the gloves off. The entire human military was mobilized for the largest rescue operation in galactic history, but Earth was not the only world responding to the crisis. Species across the galaxy who had their own children stolen by slavers began coordinating their efforts. The Silent Storm Network had grown from Hyon's personal quest for revenge into a coalition of hundreds of worlds united by shared loss and determination. The Krill Slaver Guild found itself fighting a war on dozens of fronts simultaneously. Their bases were raided, their ships were hunted, their allies abandoned them as the political winds shifted against the slave trade. The mighty organization that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries began crumbling under the weight of coordinated resistance. In desperation, the remaining Krill leaders made a decision that would seal their fate. They gathered their surviving forces for one last gamble, a massive raid on the human colony of New Terra, where they planned to take thousands of hostages. They believed that threatening so many innocent lives would force their enemies to negotiate. They were wrong. News of the planned raid reached the Silent Storm Network hours before the attack was scheduled to begin. Hyan and his children were aboard a rescue ship heading to another enslaved world when the message arrived. Every human fleet in the sector immediately changed course toward New Terra, while alien allies provided intelligence and support. The battle for New Terra lasted 6 hours and ended with the complete destruction of the Krill Slaver Guild. As an organized force, the few survivors scattered to the far reaches of space, where they lived as hunted fugitives, afraid to show their faces in civilized systems. But for Hyan, the war was not over yet. His children were safe, and the organization that had destroyed his family was defeated, but thousands of other children remained in slavery throughout the galaxy. The Silent Storm had become something larger than his personal quest for revenge. It had become a movement that would not rest until every enslaved being was freestanding on the bridge of his ship with Day and Nari beside him. Hyan looked out at the stars and thought about Yuna. She had died protecting their children, but her sacrifice had sparked something that would change the galaxy forever. The quiet doctor who believed in healing had become the inspiration for the greatest liberation movement in galactic history. The slavers had made a fatal mistake when they chose to attack his family. They had awakened something in humanity that had been sleeping since the end of the Terran wars. The galaxy was about to remember why humans had earned their reputation as the most dangerous species in known space when their loved ones were threatened. And in the darkness between stars, former slaves turned hunters continued their work, guided by a simple question that had started a revolution: who took my kids? 6 months after the destruction of the Krill Slaver Guild, the galaxy had changed in ways that nobody could have predicted. The slave trade still existed, but it operated in the shadows, now afraid to target human colonies or any world that had joined the growing alliance against forced labor. The Silent Storm Network had evolved from a desperate father's quest for revenge into something resembling a galactic government dedicated to protecting the innocent children who had been slaves for years, were reunited with families who thought they were dead. Trading posts that had once openly sold sentient beings now faced economic blockades and military action. But Hyan knew that his work was far from finished. The destruction of one slaver organization was just the beginning. Every day brought new reports of children taken from their homes, parents murdered defending their families, entire populations enslaved by criminal cartels who thought they were beyond justice. He stood in the command center of Hope Station, a massive space facility that had become the headquarters of the liberation movement. Around him, dozens of species worked together, sharing intelligence, coordinating rescue missions, and planning strikes against slaver strongholds. The station had been built from salvaged slaver ships welded together into a symbol of Defiance Day. Now, 9 years old, had become something of a legend among the rescued children. His stories of survival in the uranium mines inspired others to keep fighting, while his quick mind helped decode slaver communications and identify new targets. He worked alongside adults twice his age with a seriousness that broke Hyan's heart. Nari had found her own way to contribute to the cause. Her paintings of life before and during slavery were displayed throughout the station, reminding everyone why they fought. The images of children in cages next to pictures of the same children playing freely served as powerful propaganda that was broadcast across the galaxy. The family had been changed by their experiences in ways that could never be undone. Hyan no longer tried to shelter his children from the harsh realities of the universe they had seen too much, suffered too much to return to the innocent life they had known on Colony 7. Instead, he taught them to use their pain as fuel for justice. Today brought news that made Hyan's blood run cold. Intelligence reports indicated that the syndicate bosses who controlled the pleasure worlds had formed an alliance with the Mining Guild and several other criminal organizations. They were planning something called Operation Clean Slate, a massive coordinated strike against human colonies designed to capture enough hostages to force a ceasefire. The plan was simple in its brutality. They would take children from dozens of worlds simultaneously, then threaten to kill them all unless the Silent Storm disbanded and the Galactic Alliance ended their anti-slavery campaigns. It was the desperate gamble of cornered predators who knew their time was running out, but they had made the same mistake as the Krill before them. They assumed that threatening human children would make humans surrender. Instead, it made them absolutely furious. Within hours of receiving the intelligence reports, every human fleet in the galaxy received the same message from Earth Command. The diplomatic niceties were over. The time for negotiation had passed. Any organization involved in the slave trade was now considered an enemy of humanity and would be treated accordingly. Admiral Chun arrived at Hope Station with the largest fleet ever assembled by Earth military. 200 warships accompanied by support vessels from 60 different worlds that had joined the alliance. The message was clear and unmistakable. The galaxy would no longer tolerate the buying and selling of children. Hyan was invited to address the fleet commanders before they departed for their targets. He stood before the assembled officers, representatives of dozens of species, united by shared outrage at crimes against innocence. His words were broadcast across the galaxy so that every slaver, every buyer, every corrupt official would hear them. My name is Park Hyan. He began 6 months ago. I was a bartender on Nexus Station trying to find my stolen children. Today I stand before you as proof that ordinary people can change the universe when they refuse to accept injustice. The slavers who took my family thought they were safe. They believed that nobody would care about 2 human children from a small colony. They were wrong. Every child stolen from their parents creates another enemy of slavery. Every family destroyed becomes a weapon pointed at the hearts of those who profit from suffering. We are not here for revenge, although revenge tastes sweet. We are here to ensure that no other parent will stand where I stood to ask the question that haunts my dreams. Who took my kids? We are here to make that question unnecessary because there will be no more children to take. The final campaign lasted 3 days and reshaped the political map of the galaxy. Slaver strongholds that had operated for centuries were reduced to radioactive rubble. Criminal organizations with thousands of members were wiped out of existence. Mining facilities powered by slave labor were liberated and their overseers faced justice from their former victims. The pleasure worlds that had served the galaxies elite for generations found themselves under siege by fleets that showed no mercy for those who had profited from suffering. The syndicate bosses who had planned Operation Clean Slate were captured alive and forced to watch as their empires crumbled. Around them, when the smoke cleared, over 10,000 enslaved children had been freed from facilities across known space families. Torn apart by the slave trade were reunited, while entire species that had been considered extinct were discovered. In hidden breeding facilities, the galaxy learned that the slave trade had been far larger and more horrible than anyone had imagined, but the most important victory was not measured in ships destroyed or criminals captured. It was measured in the smile on a little girl's face as she saw her parents for the first time in 3 years. It was counted in the tears of joy when families thought dead were found alive. It was written in new laws passed by governments that had finally found the courage to do what was right. Hyon returned to Colony 7 with his children to rebuild the home that had been destroyed by the slavers. The house was exactly as they had left it, except for the memorial garden where Yuna was buried. They planted new flowers around her grave while sharing stories of everything that had happened since her death. Dad Nari asked as they worked in the garden together, "Do you think Mom would be proud of what we did?" Hyon looked at his daughter, whose paintings had inspired millions to join